1.
You're all good. No, we're not doing it again.
So what I'm going to get everyone to do now is turn your cap lamps on if you haven't already done so. There is a big red button at the top. Push that once or twice. Now, don't ever worry about shining that light in my eyes. 1, I'm used to it, and 2, I really like the spotlight, so please shine away. But beware of other people's eyes, okay? Please don't shine those lights deliberately into other people's eyes. And if you're looking at someone, you might actually be shining your light in their eyes and blinding them. So that's why I always recommend to angle the cap lamp down so it's facing the cap. Welcome to level 2 of the Central Deborah Gold Mine. Now watch your step as you hop off this lift. This is, oh sorry, didn't mean to just elbow you on the head there. This is a rather wet part of the tunnel down here, so take your time as you're walking down here. Follow me.
Ollie, it's wet, right?
Come on through. Now do you see that mine truck / car in the centre of the tunnel there? If I can get everyone just to wait in front of it, that would be good. Now that is a very heavy bent door, so what I'd actually prefer is if we help just close it and everyone comes from this side, because if it actually stays open and hits your back, it's going to cause a little bit of concussion. So just head down to that mine truck / car in the centre of the tunnel, and I'll meet you there in a moment. So that mine truck in the centre of the tunnel.
You have the white clothes with your expedition and other choice of shoes and hands. You need to fold them up. Proper Minecraft.
Right here, and I'm going to go down this way. I'm going to go around here. I'm going to go around here. Okay, oh, look at this. You've pretty much nearly done what I wanted you to do. But it is a big group, so I want everyone to see what's behind me. So we might actually come down a little bit further. So we're down here. All the kids, mini miners to the front.
The mini miners.
Now, if at any stage we're standing around and you notice that there is a child behind you, just swap spots. So the kids are all sorts of people are at the front. Now, first things first. How are we all feeling? Good? Welcome to my favourite place. I would totally live down here, but my boss said no. So there goes that idea. Especially now that we have Wi-Fi in here. I was like, oh, wait, what? Yeah, I know. Although, granted, the Wi-Fi is for safety and emergency purposes, so you can't just log on to it. I know. Now,
how did you get Wi-Fi down here?
very, very difficult. I can tell you that. Weeks and weeks of infrastructure trying to get it down here. Now you are all standing 61 metres directly underneath that big white poppet head. So this is the same mine shaft that I pointed out to you up at the surface. The only difference is you're now looking at it from 61 metres underground. How cool is that? As you can see, the mine shaft has 4 sections. 1, 2, 3, 4. The centre 2 sections are called the winding or the haulage compartments. This is where the cages would go up and down to the different levels, carrying the miners and their equipment to where they were needed. Now over this side is the smoke box. It worked like a chimney. It drew out all of the smoke and the fumes and the dust from normal blasting that the miners did. And down this way is the ladderway. Now back in the 1940s, when this was a working gold mine, that ladderway was the miners' one and only emergency exit. So if the cages stopped working, that was your only way out at the end of your shift. The ladders do go from the surface right down to the bottom of the mine shaft. Now remember, this is a 422 metre deep mine shaft. So if you were one of the lucky miners working on level 17, the lowest level of this mine, and you had to climb out at the end of your shift because those cages stopped working, the climb from the bottom took you 2.5 hours upwards. So you had gravity working against you. Now I have climbed down from the surface to this level. That was 61 metres and I did that climb for fun. At least it was fun the day I did it. It was not fun the next day. I woke up and my entire body was in agony. I couldn't move a muscle, so I called in sick. But as my mentor, Ken, who was an ex-miner, in fact his uncle worked at this mine back in the day, as Ken liked to constantly remind me from that point on, he was like, Sarah Jane, do you think the miners who had to climb up from level 17 woke up the next day and their bodies were aching? Do you think they got to call in sick? No, Ken, they didn't. No, they didn't. So you should have come into work too, so you knew what it felt like. I didn't. I stayed at home. But he was right. The miners back in the day didn't have the luxury of sick pay. They didn't come to work, they weren't paid. And let's face it, climbing up ladders, all of that hard work was part of the job. If you couldn't do that, your boss, your mine manager, will give the job to somebody who could. So you would come to work and you would work through the pain. Now, as you can kind of tell, this is the wettest part of the tunnel. Who agrees with me that we should go somewhere much drier? Yes? Yes? Oh, thank you.
I don't.
Really? No.
I don't.
Come with me this way.
Just go ahead.
But yeah, we're really lucky with how they get air out of the ground.
You think you can go versus me? That's the point.
You saw the spray paint.
The amount of kids go, oh look, it's gone. I'm like, yeah, sorry.
No, it's not. Now, this is a small room in a big group, so I don't know if we're all going to fit. It's feel free to find somewhere. Make yourselves comfortable. Look at that. I think it's because there's so many kids on this building. Kids don't pick up as many kids. Okay. Now, the miners who worked at this mine back in the 1940s worked an 8-hour shift underground. They had half an hour for lunch during that time. Now, do you think they had their lunches back up on the surface, or do you think they had to stay deep underground?
Deep underground.
Deep underground is correct. The main reason why they stayed underground their entire shift is that you've got a tiny cage that carries 4 miners at a time up and down the mine shaft. But at its most productive, this mine had 40 miners working underground every shift, trying to get all 40 of them back up to the surface for a half-hour lunch break using a tiny cage. Didn't work, so they stayed underground. But they did dig themselves out a nice little room to eat their lunches in, and that's what you're sitting in. This was their lunch room. Now, I will point out to you that this room wasn't this big back in the day. In fact, the tunnels we're walking along were also not this spacious. We've come down here and we've made these tunnels bigger for big groups. The tunnels back in the 1940s were really, really tiny here at the Central Deborah Gold Mine. They were a little bit taller than the miners who worked underground. Now, most of the miners who came here to Bendigo came from Cornwall over in England. They had been hard rock miners for generations and generations over there. But they were mining out tin and copper, which is pretty boring compared to gold. So when news of the gold rush reached them, they packed their bags, came over here, and we're really glad that they did, because they were the experts in hard rock mining. And believe it or not, this rock is incredibly hard. So they brought over the skills in hard rock mining, the technology that they used, but also the words that they used and things like that as well. But the thing about Cornish miners is that on average they're about 5'2". Now my mum's side of the family all comes from Cornwall. My mum is 5 foot. I can rest my chin on my mum's head, so my mum is there. The miners were a little bit taller than my mum, not there. The tunnels were there. That's how tall the tunnels were back in the day. The tunnels underneath us, yeah, you'd be okay, but you're still growing, are still that tall. So when I've gone down lower, I have had to duck down to get through the tunnels. Now it was very, very, very rare to have electricity underground here in Bendigo. In fact, usually everything before the 1900s here in Bendigo, underground was done using the light of a candle. This little contraption right here is called a spider. It is the only spider you will see here at the Central Deborah Gold Mine. You won't get the 8-legged creepy crawly types here because there's nothing for them to eat this far down. And if that's the case, well, they just don't come down. I've been a tour guide here for 5 years. I haven't seen one spider yet, except for this one. Now this is called a spider because, like a spider, it sat on a wall. In our case here, between a couple of planks of wood, but if you didn't have planks of wood, you would have to chisel a hole into the rock, stick it in there. And that's what would hold a candle. And that is what the miners would work by. The light of 1, maybe 2 candles, if they were lucky. There was only ever 1 or 2 candles at a time because the mining company that the miners worked for didn't supply the candles. You had to buy your own. And back in the day, candles weren't cheap. So if you could only afford 1 or 2 candles at a time, you wanted to make sure they lasted for as long as possible. Now, if you've ever tried to do anything by the light of a candle, you'll realize that it's next to impossible. And the miners were missing a lot of gold underground in the early days. So in the early 1900s, the miners here in Bendigo started using one of these instead. Now this is a carbide lamp. This is a very special type of carbide lamp. This is the Bendigo bucket lamp. So guess where it was invented? I was waiting for someone to say Ballarat there. I'm so glad that no one did. I'm always usually hoping it was one cheeky person saying Ballarat. Ballarat wishes they invented this. Friendly rivalry between Bendigo and Ballarat, just in case you didn't. No one here is from Ballarat, right? No? Okay, that's okay. We're all good. It's okay. I love Ballarat. Sovereign Hill's pretty cool. It's not as cool as this, but it's pretty cool. Okay, so calcium carbide is a man-made mineral. It reacts with water to produce acetylene gas. It's the same gas that they use in oxy-welding. It is highly flammable. So the very first thing the miners did at the beginning of their shift, before they came down underground, is they would head to the carbide lamp room back up on the surface, and they grabbed one of these, and they filled it up with carbide. They would then plunge it into a bucket or a billy can of water, just like that. There is a tiny hole at the top of the canister underneath my finger, and if you can't see it, don't blame you, it is that tiny. But that's where the water would slowly drip in. You get that chemical reaction. The gas travelled up along that pipe, you would light that with a match, and that produced a flame that was 15 times brighter than candlelight. So at least now the miners could see what they were doing underground. Now the miners here at the Central Deborah Gold Mine continued using carbide lamps well into the 1940s. Now by this time, cap lamps had been invented, so you're probably thinking, well, why weren't they just wearing those instead? Well, the carbide lamp has something that a cap lamp doesn't. It has fire. Now, Fire needs oxygen to burn, and the miners need oxygen to breathe. It was a really good way of knowing just how much air there was underground. If the flames started to flicker and die out, but they knew they still had a lot of carbide in the canister, it meant there wasn't much air underground. Now, to get air underground back in the day, what nearly every single mine in Bendigo did, and remember there were about 5,500 of these mines, is they would meet up with a neighbouring mine shaft. Your tunnels would meet halfway, and you got natural airflow underground between the two shafts. The saying is you can actually walk from one side of Bendigo to the other underground. All the tunnels are connected, and that's how they got air underground. It's similar to what we use today. We actually use the natural airflow between the mine shaft, and we force it around here up that lift that we came down in. So that's how we get natural airflow underground. We do come down underground every day, and we measure how much air is underground. We're always in the green because we use science to our benefit. Same with mines today too. The big ones, you will do your tunnel down, and they'll have vent holes at certain intervals, and that's how they got their air underground, get their air underground these days too. But if they're really, really far underground, they also have airbags today. We don't need those, which is good because we're only 61 metres underground. Now the last thing that I'm going to show you whilst we're here is the miner's hard hat that they wore on their heads back in the 1940s. Now, is anyone here wearing a flannelette shirt today? It's a bit too thick to be a flannelette. No one's got a flannelette shirt on? No, that's all right. Now, just in case you're not quite sure what flannelette is, it's a very thick fabric. You get winter pajamas made out of it. You get winter bed sheets, very thick winter shirts. But you also get hard hats from the 1940s made out of it too. This is a very thick fabric that was molded into shape to fit the miner's head, and then it was covered in glue to make it hard. That is not up to today's safety standards by a long shot. Now the mine manager, the guy in charge, always wore a hard hat on his head because he wanted to set a very good example for the miners who worked underneath him. But I can tell you all right now, as soon as he left the area, nearly every single miner was like, oh, yeah, he's gone. And they all took the hard hats off. They didn't have the same rules and regulations we do today for their safety. They weren't the most comfortable things to wear. You didn't have to wear them. So if you saw the photos of miners underneath Bendigo back in the day, you'll notice that very rarely were they wearing a hard hat. Now, I never recommend taking your hard hat off whilst you're underground. In fact, the miner who was wearing this one right here was probably really glad he was doing so, because instead of a hole in his hard hat, he'd have a hole in his head. We believe that that hole there was made by a rock about the size of my fist, falling from the ceiling. Bam! Now, you'll be glad to know, and setting your minds at ease, if a rock that size hit our hard hats today, wouldn't do anywhere near that amount of damage, because our hard hats are not made from flannelette. Our hard hats are made from an incredibly strong plastic, and believe it or not, it is the same plastic that Lego is made out of. And if you've ever stood on a brick of Lego with no shoes on, you know exactly how hard that stuff is.
Jesus.
Oh yeah, it hurts. But imagine if you weren't wearing anything on your head at all. And remember, most of the miners here in Bendigo weren't. So if they were caught in rockfall and they managed to survive it, the result wasn't pretty. So brain damage and head trauma was fairly common back in the day here in Bendigo, which is really sad. Now, any questions before we move on to our next display? We're all good? We're all good. All right, Melanie, this way. As we're walking along here to your right, we go upstairs and we're about the roof with our lights on. It is not historically accurate. The miners did not have a large tax
room over there with the lovely festoon lighting is not historically accurate. There is something right here that is historically accurate, and that is the miner's toilet. They called this the Thunderbox. I'll leave that to your imaginations as to why they called it the Thunderbox. Now, as far as I've been able to tell, very few mines, it was only the ones, the later mines, like this one, that had a toilet seat. Usually it was just the bucket. And speaking of bucket, it was the job of the youngest miner, the apprentice, to take that bucket up at the end of every shift. Okay, so who's the youngest here? You're pretty young. Yeah, you're so. But okay, now I'll tell you this though. It might get you to consider maybe taking the bucket up. Okay. Remember how I said you would cram 4 miners at a time in those cages to go up and down the mine shaft? Well, at the end of their 8-hour shift, the miners smell really bad. Okay. They're a lot of BO, very, very smelly. And you were crammed in there with 3 other smelly miners, okay? There was only one time that one miner got to ride that cage by himself. It was the apprentice with the toilet bucket. So yeah, you had a smell, but you got to spread out. So I would do it, maybe. But then, if the cage was stopped really, really fast and that didn't have a lid on top of the bucket, that could go everywhere. So, yeah, I'd take being crammed in with 3 others. Yeah, now I've made my decision. Come with me this way.
Is that right?
So yeah, this is all changed. It was never this flat back in the day. Now, I'm going to teach you all a little bit of mine maintenance now. So whenever the miners needed to test the rock that they were working under to make sure it was safe and secure and not going to fall on top of them, they would use a technique that they called the sounding of the backs. Now the back is a mining term, and it just means the ceiling or the roof of the tunnel. This is the back of the tunnel. Now to sound the backs, to test the rock, the miners would grab a metal bar and they'd tap the rock like this. And they were listening for the noise that it made. That was a good noise. It means that rock is nice and solid and secure and it's not going to fall off anytime soon. But every now and then the miners would hear this noise instead. Ready? Hear the difference? Yeah. That hollow noise is called a drummy sound, and it'll let the miners know that that rock right there is loose. That could fall away and do some damage. So when they heard that drummy sound, they did one of 2 things. They either grabbed a pinch bar and they tried to remove the loose rock from the rock face by prizing it off or scraping it off. That is called scaling or barring down, and we still do that today here at this mine. But if it was too dangerous to do that, if they thought far too much rock was going to fall down and on top of them, what the miners would do instead is they would build a timber set. I'm just going to pop this back here so I don't accidentally take it with me again. And next tour guide goes, and Sarah, change your seat again. Come with me this way, I'm going to show you a timber set.
So how far are you under?
60 meters.
Is that super deep? That's deep. But is that more than 1,000,000?
surrounded by all this wood and it's soaking up the noise. This is a timber set. Another name for one of these was the whispering woods or talking timbers. This was essentially the miners' early warning system for any rock fall. So, if they heard scatterings of rock on the logs on top, they're called lagging by the way, or creaking from pressure from the rock, sort of forcing the wood in a little bit, well, they knew to get out of the area because that could cave in. So it was their early warning system as well. Now, you are all in a gold mine. What is it you want to see in a gold mine? Let's go and see some gold.
Why did it say do not enter till 9
One shaft.
It is quartz. That's not gold though.
You want to fall down?
Now feel free to come up a little bit. If you can't see what's behind these glass windows right now, don't worry. I do give everyone some time after I do my little spiel here to come up and have a closer look. So you will get a chance to have a look. But behind these 3 windows right here is exactly what the miners were looking for. It's a quartz reef. Remember, quartz is the only rock you're going to find gold in, and we're really, really lucky because there's gold right here, and there's gold in the second window. There is gold in the third window, but there's no little plate to let you know where it is. You've got to go looking for that yourself. There's also another metal down here, iron pyrite. Now, iron pyrite has a nickname. Does anyone know what it is?
Fool's gold.
It is fool's gold. So we've got real gold and we've got fool's gold. There is a tiny amount of real gold in fool's gold. It is minuscule, but it's there. The miners would actually capture up the iron pyrite, take it away for processing to get that gold out of it. Now a little bit of rock science or geology for you all. The rocks underneath Bendigo are incredibly unique. We're well known for our quartz reef structure called a saddle reef. To the best of our knowledge, there are only 2 saddle reefs in the world. One is here underneath Bendigo, and the other one is underneath Nova Scotia in Canada, which is the 2, that's it. Now, the formation of a saddle reef. I want everyone here to imagine 480 million years ago. Can we do that?
Yeah.
Yeah? I'm going to help you out for those people who are struggling trying to imagine. This is way before the dinosaurs, so no imagining T-Rexes. And where you're now standing at that time used to be the bottom of the ocean floor. So just imagine lots of water and you've got it covered. Now, you've had layers of sand and mud hardening into layers of sandstone and slate. So all of the rock that I showed you, that grey rock on the surface, well, that's the same grey rock that you see around you right now. Now, from that 480 million year mark, we're going to jump in our time machines and travel forwards 50 million years. And in that time, you've had pressure from the east and the west forcing the layers of rock to buckle and fold until you've got a saddle like that. So the rocks underneath Bendigo look like huge sheets of corrugated iron, one stacked upon the other. But when the layers of rock folded, cracks formed between